machine, a veil over the eye. Race is a lie, a script for the managed, a reason to die. It's the dementia, the spirit, it's the glitch in the code. It's the heavy, heavy baggage on a sovereign road. Dissolve the construct, right? Yeah, yeah. It started as a lie, a whisper in the dark, designed to keep the brothers from finding the spark. Father is a soul whose sovereign operating system was no longer whole. He didn't pull that trigger from his fully human place. The construct had the wheel, the construct ran the race. So stop fighting it, Father, and dismantle the disease. If a lawyer wrote the code, the architect holds the keys. What was manufactured can be dismantled.
Great Wednesday, and welcome to the Fully Human Trinity podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jess-Esther. How you doing today, Jess?
Doing great.
And we are honored to have as a first-time guest on the Fully Human Trinity, but it's my second opportunity to interview Jenna Nicholas. So, Jenna, welcome to the Fully Human Trinity.
Wonderful. It's really great to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Great to have you. Now, before we get started with our interview, we always like to do what we call a check-in. And our check-in just kind of sets the state of for our listening audience of where we're vibrating and which state we are right now, as well as for our conversation. And we measure the state by choosing a number between 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome. And so based on that numerical value, where would you say, Jenna, you are right now, just in this moment?
I love that question. It's one I come back to a lot. I think in this moment, I'd say about 7.5.
Excellent. Excellent. Jess, how about yourself?
In this moment, I'm feeling about a 9. Yeah. Really grateful to be here. Really grateful to be here. Really grateful to meet you, Jenna.
Grateful to meet you too.
And I'm a 10. And I say I'm a 10 because my 10 is based off going through a list of gratitude. And when I go through my list of gratitude, what I'm grateful for, life, health, breath, ability to see, hear, etc., that sets me at a 10. And so with that being said, Jenna, welcome to the Fully Human Trinity again. And so let's welcome her fully, Jess, by having you read her bio for our listening audience and set the context of who we're speaking with today.
All right. Sounds good. So today, family, our guest doesn't just talk about conscious capital, she moves it. Jenna Nicholas is the president of LightPost Capital and the co-founder and CEO of Impact Experience, a company built to do one thing: bridge the gap between investors, entrepreneurs, and the communities of the old systems overlooks. She's an angel investor who has backed over 3 unicorns. She has led Invest Philanthropy, a coalition of more than 170 foundations, over $50 billion in assets, moving capital out of fossil fuels and into impact. She worked with the World Bank on green bonds. She went to Stanford and earned her MBA. She was the Forbes 30 under 30, featured in the New York Times and Financial Times and Forbes. And she's the best-selling author of Enlightened Bottom Line, a book I'm loving, a book exploring the intersection of spirituality, business, and investing, a book that gave language to what we are currently living. But here's what the resume won't tell you. Jenna is an active member of the Baha'i faith, and she was raised by women who taught her that saving one soul is enough to justify a whole life. And she believes, just as we do, that wealth must serve humanity. So welcome, Jenna Nicholas, to the Fully Human Trinity.
Amazing. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, Jenna, what I want to do is get started with really, we talk about in our podcast, Fully Human Trinity. Even our theme song started off with "Race is a Lie." And I want to set the context behind it because our belief is that identity controls pretty much everything most people are going to deal with in their lives. It controls your thoughts, your behaviors, who you love, who you hate, your ambitions, as well as your goals and your desires. And so with that being said, we're building the Fully Human movement based off 4 core principles, 4 agreements, And these 4 agreements of being fully human. Number 1 is energy is everything and everything is energy. Number 2, energy is in a constant state of motion, either increase or a decrease. Number 3, we focus on the increase. We realize that we can create decrease in each other, but our true north is the increase. And number 4, our identity is fully human, not our race, religion, sexual orientation, political party, womb, career, or anything that separates us from one another. We understand that being fully human and being energy is quantum physics, and that's what we focus on. And that allows us to connect, engage, and co-create at a much deeper, higher level of resonance without worrying about being triggered by divisive identities. And so our first question, with that being said, is going to fall within the identity perspective. It's just read your bio, which is very impressive. You've had a lot of things that you've achieved in your life in 30 years. So that's definitely impressive. My question now, as we really look into from the fully human perspective, is really understanding now your Baha'i faith. What I really want to understand, as I was reading your book, you mentioned Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is something that Jess and I both are familiar with because of the people we're building with. Because we are. And you connected and you had the opportunity, the privilege to meet Desmond Tutu. And so now, with that context being set, I want to know within, how does your faith in the Baha'i faith and your practice of understanding Ubuntu and your importance of putting in your book, how does it impact your life, your identity, and you as an impact investor in the business?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the question and thoughtfulness. And I can already feel myself going from a 7.5 to a 10 out of 10, just in hearing from you both. So really excited to be here today. And this is a question that I think about a lot. And one of the core principles of the Baha'i faith is the idea of unity and diversity, and the idea of the equality of men and women, the harmony of science and religion, the concept around work as a form of worship. And so a lot of these principles are principles that really inspire much of what I engage in on a daily basis, and I think very much interconnected with the idea of Ubuntu. And there's a sort of a concept in the Baha'i writings around the idea that humanity is like a human body, and that what affects one part of the body affects the whole. And so we have to, when we're considering the impact of our decisions on different communities or people, how are we really taking that holistic and ecosystem approach to so many of these questions and conversations. And I think so much of the ideas behind Ubuntu and this I am because we are is really sort of taking that understanding of our interconnectedness, and then what is the ripple effect of when we truly see ourselves as part of this interconnected whole. How do we make decisions differently as a result of that, whether it's how we're allocating kind of our time, talent, and treasures, kind of animating from that starting point. So the interconnection of the principles in the Baha'i faith and the concept of Ubuntu is definitely things I come back to a lot as guideposts.
And what was your exposure? I know you talk about it in your book, but I want you to share with our listening audience how I believe your mother played a role in exposing you to that, and what that has meant in your, number one, being influenced by it, number two, continue to build upon that legacy.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. My mother became a Baha'i in her 20s, so I grew up kind of knowing about the Baha'i faith. There's a lot of emphasis in the Baha'i community on independent investigation of truth, and just because your parents might be Baha'is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are a Baha'i. You have to kind of choose it for yourself. And so growing up from the age of about 11 to 15, I took part in a program called Transformation for Peace, and it was with young people from all around the world, and it was all about reflecting on our values and place in the world. And it was inspired by the Baha'i faith, and it was really played an influential role for me in shaping how I think about the limited amount of time that we have in this world, and how do we use our energy towards directed to addressing some of the greatest challenges. And so it really sort of lighted this spark in me that's going to continue to be a through line throughout. And the Baha'i Center is in Haifa in Israel, and so having a chance to also visit there on pilgrimage. And the core belief in the Baha'i writings is that the underlying spiritual teachings of all religions are the same. And so being able to also learn about other religions and pathways and really see this through line of running throughout, and is something that really kind of inspired me and has inspired my journey.
Yes.
And would you say that you were already under the influence of the Baha'i faith before you got into capital and you began your career? It's safe to make that assumption. So you approached it with that understanding and that mindset.
Definitely, yeah. So it's from quite a young age. Definitely the concepts around the Baha'i faith and some of what we've been talking about today, it was a big part of the inspiration, and I think really helped to influence how I then decided what to direct my time to professionally, and really being drawn to the field of social entrepreneurship and social responsible investing, and how we really blend building sustainable revenue producing models with this deep consideration around social and environmental impact. A lot of the inspiration for me in pursuing a career in that area really kind of stemmed from my faith and the principles of the Baha'i faith.
Wow.
Now,
Can I just comment really quick, because this is
absolutely
so incredible to see the differences in our conditions just between Jenna's experience and myself, where what you had, Jenna, is such a gift to receive that information, especially at that age, because the information that I received at that age was the exact opposite. Right? And the religion that then I opted into was one that saw separation and seclusion and like I have it right, you have it wrong mentality. And so how long it's taken me to like work through that to get to this point that you're saying. It's like I see what my algebra teacher was saying in school of like, it doesn't matter how you solve the problem. Right? We're all, as humans, going to solve the problem, and we're going to do it in our own unique way. So it's just giving me this confirmation of like, it doesn't matter what conditions we came from and what we were offered, because what you're offering here is that there's a tie, there's a commonality, there's a humanity that's like this web underneath all of it. That's like we're all going to be okay. We're all going to get there in our own way.
Yeah, I love that. I think about, there's this line from Ram Dass who says, we're all just walking each other home. And I love that idea. And to your point of just that we may come at it from different starting points and to engaging around some of these themes from different contexts, but how do we provide these spaces for ever expanding circles, for opportunities to be able to engage and deepen on our paths and journeys. So really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thanks.
And I also find it insightful that, Jess, you mentioned the contrast, and definitely our cultural givens play a huge role in how we see ourselves and shaping our identity. And Jenna, what I'm showing with you here now is the 6 pillars of being fully human. I shared with you the 4 agreements before, that once you make these agreements, this is how you live being fully human. And once you have your identity, which we discussed briefly, now we're going to talk about the growth mindset. And it's important that we put it in this framework, because my background is system engineering. So I think in frameworks and logic. So everything for me is 4 this, 6 this, 7 habits of highly effective people, 17 spiritual laws of success. I can go on. And it helps me understand things conceptually. And more importantly, as Stephen R. Covey talks about, is I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as my personal Bible. He talks about when you learn something, learn to teach, called the third person learning. And it's going to be a deeper understanding of how you learn it and how you understand it. And that impacts my growth mindset. And I want to share with you, because growth mindset for us, what I'm learning, I should say, is that the people who really resonate with the fully human movement that we're building are folks who've gone through a wreckage in their lives. And that wreckage is something that causes you to question your identity, either emotionally, financially, physically. And within that question, it begins to open you up to being able to learn something new. And for me, my wreckage was being a conscious capitalist. I was the former president and founder of the DC chapter of Conscious Capitalism. I've been a benefit corporation in Maryland. So I've been in the conscious capitalism space, social responsible space for the last 15, 20 years of my life. And I went to Baltimore with a mission to build a conscious community within Baltimore that purchased real estate and created a whole economy through the power of real estate. And then COVID-19 hit, and it pretty much dismantled that whole thing once I got success going. And a long time I had the mentality of why me, why did this happen for me, until I had to grow out of it. But I also, in reading your book, and that's why I wanted to bring the parallel, you also had a wreckage story as a result of COVID. And I just kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about how what you went through as a result of coming out of COVID, your wreckage that led to where you are now and who you are as an individual and how you see your purpose in the world.
No, I really appreciate that, and it's a theme that really emerged a lot as I was interviewing people for my book, Enlightened Bottom Line, around what were these sort of key moments in people's lives that become this sort of inspiration for really bringing together principles around spirituality and purpose and business and investing. In this sort of language around the dark nights of the soul is something that have came up quite frequently in those conversations. I think for me, there's been a few things in my life, but certainly was poignantly, so we talked a bit earlier about my mother. So I was raised by my mother and grandmother, which my book is dedicated to my mother and grandmother. And they both passed away, my grandmother in 2018 and my mother in 2020. And I think that certainly, like, so much of my, tying to our previous conversation around identity, but so much of my identity was centered around being a daughter and a granddaughter, and just the constant engagement and advice and support system that they both provided. That it definitely was a very kind of recalibrating set of experiences to both, like, be present to the grief and the pain of that experience, and then also what does it look like to metabolize that pain. And I think, to your point around COVID, that the individual experience of grief with the success that people in different circumstances but were going through is definitely something that was a catalyst for deepening on this pathway of how do we continue to operate from this perspective of that we're fundamentally kind of spiritual beings having a human experience, and what does it look like to, like, reground in that reality and show up and engage from that space.
Yeah, digesting our grief.
Absolutely. And the second part of that question is this. And reading your book, I read that you went to New Orleans with Ben and Jerry's board on a trip to Cancer Alley. And what struck me in my mind when I read that was that how cancer now is formatted or linked into my mind because of a gentleman by the name of Mike Murphy, who wrote a book called The Creation Frequency. And the book was a book that I picked up right after my wreckage in Baltimore when I was searching for my identity. When I believed at that time that my identity was based on my race. And I had built my movement based off the upliftment of my race. And that was everything that was driving me. That was my purpose in life. That was why I got out of bed in the morning. That was why I read the books that I read. And when everything crashed, not just because of COVID, but because of how people showed me that you can't build a movement off shared trauma. That just because you have trauma in common, that's not a strong enough pillar to build a community on. And so I began to question my faith, not my faith, but my identity to my race. And then I read this book, The Creation Frequency. It was about manifestations. And it really gave me a different perspective on manifestation, so much so that I followed this man for 3 years because he wasn't a really well-known author, but his book was impactful. And so much so that I followed him and realized he was opening up a retreat center in Colombia, the Andes in South America. And I said, I'm going to go there one day. Then my mom died. And her death definitely had some mental anxiety and challenges prior to her death, dealing with her as a caretaker, then her passing away. So I needed to go someplace to heal. So I went to Colombia to heal. And while I was in Colombia to heal, I met Jess. That's where Jess and I met. This was almost a year ago in the Andes Mountains. And when Jess and I became kindred spirits, because she was also going through wreckage, also in Mountains of Hope, at a point where she was coming in. I want Jess to speak about that a little bit. Then I want to ask you a question, Jenna, part two of the question about growth mindset. So Jess, speak to a little bit about why you were at Mountains of Hope and what you were healing, what you were doing.
Yeah, it's kind of cute and funny that you say that I was in the storm, because I didn't recognize that I was in a storm at the time, right? Like you don't see, I was stepping into the mystery at the time of not really knowing exactly where I was going. But what I was following was a dear friend who was in a cancer crisis herself. And as a friend and as a death doula, I felt inspired to go be and serve where she was and where there were others who were on this cancer journey and looking for healing. Yeah.
And so, Jenna, with that context, my question for you now is, do you allow things that shook you to your core, grief, loss, to inspire you, to define you? How do you process that? Jess and I talk about how she found a way to manage grief and gratitude at the same time. And so my question is for you, how do you handle that and then leverage that to continue building your legacy?
No, really powerful set of experiences, and thank you both for sharing that. And a couple of things that come to mind, and I really appreciate the death doula role and energy in this, the creating the space for that metabolizing and processing. And there's a line in the Baha'i writings that talks about death as a messenger of joy. And I have always sort of really explored, like, what does that line really mean? And there was a book that some friends of mine recommended to me after my mother passed away that really resonated with me, by Martin Prechtel. And it's when grief becomes, well, the smell of rain on dust, when grief becomes praise. And I think this piece is very much around the indigenous perspective on grieving, and I think the power of creating spaces for grieving and all that arises from that. I think part of that growth mindset is that ability to be able to hold, I think it's in many ways whole paradox, but to hold the complexity of both the depth of grief and also the recognition that so often why that grief is so strong is because of the depth of relationships and the depth of feeling that led to that, and that part of what enables that metabolizing to take place is being fully present to each part of that journey. And that's certainly a big part of the work that I try to engage in now, through certainly with Impact Experience, where we're engaging in environments that are deeply traumatic and with history that's deeply traumatic in places like Montgomery, Alabama, and even with the investing work that engage in with LightPost Capital, where we're investing into impact-oriented companies, is how do we create space for people to share all that's arising for them and what's been part of the arc of their journey, and how that's then shaping who they are today, to then be able to determine how do we move forward from here, based on all that's shaped us so far.
Yeah. Actually, I found this little picture before I came on, and I looked at the back of it, and it's something that I had written several years ago with my intentions. And it said, how and where do we connect to tell our stories?
I love that.
Yeah, because it really is that mother, grandmother energy that you're speaking with, of like, some of these conversations are only told between mouth and ear. And these are the traditions that you're speaking of that really create the solid ground from which you create.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, and I think the storytelling part of that is such a huge component. I mentioned some of his work in the book, but one of my mentors is Professor Marshall Gans from Harvard Kennedy School, and he has a framework which is the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now, and this process of tuning into what is our stories and how are we telling that story, and how does that connect to what this moment and the power of this moment, and then what is the interconnection of our stories together. So I think being able to reflect on that and what that can then lead to is also a really important aspect of this work.
Mm.
Yeah. You know, as I was reading your book, I found several instances where you talked about the importance of understanding and learning your employees and their stories. And that's where this whole wreckage to wisdom comes about. Is just like build this movement, we're interviewing fully human leaders or people who behave that way, whether they choose to identify that about it or not. But what they're sharing is their wreckage to wisdom story. And we just got off a podcast with a gentleman, and Mike, he said to him, identity is about what's your story. So the story keeps coming up over and over again. And I think that's so important, because to me, that goes to my next question, which is the purpose and serving pillar. Because I believe that, and I always ask people this question now, what is the story you're telling yourself that prevents you from change? Right? Because people are constantly telling stories, and they believe these stories. They believe that this is true and this is how life is. And it's like, that's just a story you tell. That's not necessarily the reality that I'm experiencing. Like, for example, when my mom passed away, my brother and I both dealt with it totally different, still are dealing with it completely different. I looked at it as she was ill for 2 or 3 years, and I watched her painfully go through decline in her health. And so to me, her passing was grace allowing her to now move on. And yes, I miss her presence, I miss her energy, but I don't want my mom to sit there and suffer just for my selfishness. Where my brother felt as though she left us and he got a lot of negative energy about it. And that's the story he tells himself. So my point is, that's not the reality. Same experience, we both got two different stories that we tell ourselves about it. I decided to lean myself more into purpose and serving as a result, to deal with my grief and to get myself out of my head. And I realized the best way to get myself out of my head is to serve others. And so as we talk about the higher purpose and serving, and now we're talking about wealth and adding that to it, I want to frame it this way. To me, purpose is not a mission statement. It's a gravitational center that organizes capital, relationships, and time. And it should be who your identity is. And with that, you talked about co-founding Impact Experience and bridging the gap between investors, entrepreneurs, and often overlooked communities. You mentioned Alabama. And that really resonated with me, because I've been working to create this fully human nexus. And Jess has come on as a partner of mine in this movement. It's a online platform that allows for just that same purpose of connecting impact investors with conscious businesses, in a platform they can log in that's not performative, like a LinkedIn, that you got to filter out who's real and who's not, or Facebook and all these other social media platforms that's designed to get your attention by clicks. The Fully Human Nexus is designed to get connected through the law of service. And so what I want to ask you within that context now, how do you see bridging the gap between wealth and connecting impact investors to those conscious businesses that are seeking the capital? How do you see how to bridge that? What does that look like to you as well?
And thank you for that question. And with Impact Experience, he co-founded about 10 years ago now. We've had about 6,500 people that have gone through these experiences. And it really came from an observation of, when we look at the investment landscape of the $82 trillion in the asset management industry, and less than 2% being invested into women and people of color run companies and funds, like what would it look like to create spaces to really build bridges across race, class, religion, gender, and create the opportunity to really connect as human beings. And really think about a lot of our work with one of the communities that we've actively worked in over the years is in Southern West Virginia. And the story that we like to share in the book is we always start all of our gatherings with everybody sharing a symbol or an object that has significance to them. And part of this point about what it means to be truly human and sort of truly human leadership is this aspect of our ability to see each other beyond our professional roles or what might be separating us, to really what is that underlying inspiration and who are we as human beings beneath the surface as such. And one aspect one story that really often think about from West Virginia is it's a community with incredibly high rates of diabetes, obesity, drug offense rates, many laid off coal miners. In the circle, this one time we had somebody who was a former coal miner, and he shared as his symbol a piece of coal. And he talked about how for him, coal wasn't just a job. It was his sense of identity and his connection to his family and community. And also in the group, we had somebody who had spent her life fighting for environmental causes, and she bought a solar panel. And she talked about how for her, a big part of her inspiration was actually many similar areas around identity and family and community. And on the surface that they couldn't have been more different, but through being able to see what was underneath that and what was really motivating them, they realized that they had a lot more in common than they realized, and then went on to form these partnerships and collaborations together that I think were it not for that space that was created to be able to see that humanity of the other, that ability to then form these collaborations and partnerships would be that much more minimized as a result. So I think that so much of it and so much of the spaces that we try to create with impact experiences, that ability to be able to see each other's humanity, and then when we go on to form those partnerships, there's much greater effectiveness coming from that space.
Oh, beautiful.
Absolutely. So before we go into our frequency signal break, Jess, did you want to add any context? Or
I just have some finger snaps because I just love that so much, of like, we just hold space for the co-creation to happen where we see each other all as fully human and everyone has something to contribute. Just beautiful. More snaps.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're going through the first part of our interview, which is the first three pillars. And now we're going to take a break for our frequency signal. I don't call it music because I created it using AI as the instrument, but I wrote all the lyrics and I architected the beat, choosing the sounds I wanted to hear. And Jenna, you inspired this song. So I wanted to create this for you to hear inspiration, because again, like I said, I've been in the conscious capitalism world, triple bottom line, social responsible world, whatever you want to call it, for the last 30 years. So I've had the opportunity to see people who are performative, who can talk all the right words and use all the right buzzwords, but their behaviors don't show it. I've been in conferences where we're talking about love energy all day in a room full of people. We're eating great. We just did yoga. We did breath work. And then the minute we walk outside, we walk past the homeless people. So it's like, wow. So where does our love start? Does it start when we get in the car, when we get home? But because it definitely didn't start here. So that's why I appreciate who you are and your authenticity. And so that's what inspired me to put this song together. And like I said before, being able to let go of the racial ideology lens that I believe is a 50% drainage on my creativity. I'm able to equate myself in this world utilizing AI as I liken myself to Quincy Jones, and I can orchestrate these different productions. But each one is an audible parable, I call them, because it's not designed just to be a song, it's designed to have a message with it. So this particular message that I'm going to play is called Impact Investing. So let's enjoy it.
This is not music. The AI is the instrument. I am the architect of the frequency. This is my frequency signal, King. A deeper purpose rooted in spiritual principles and ethical values serves as a compass for our decision-making, directing capital toward initiatives that build a more just, sustainable, and harmonious world.
Jenna Nicholas. Impact investing.
Impact investing.
What is it?
That question has me stressing. Impact investing. My mind's constantly wrestling with return versus impact, often leading me guessing. But to the sovereign architect, I realize the capital I have is a blessing. Impact is what I must be addressing. I choose impact over return, and this is what it means to be fully human. I find myself being mentally tested to decide if I want to make a return or do I want to create an impact. Are both achievable with this capital? It's believable, but is it conceivable? What's the plan? How do I grow this capital in a way that defines me? I find myself mentally wrestling with the idea of impact investing, cause my financial teaching tells me seek return, but how do I? My soul says seek impact. How can I choose both, avoiding a heart attack? A community leader needs funds to implement his passion, his purpose. He serves it restlessly 24/7. Total thoughts dedicated. However, his business plan is not convincing enough for capital to be used in such a manner where I invest in Google, Amazon, Intel, and Microsoft. I can do options, calls, and puts to keep my money from ever being lost. I bet on the increase, I bet on the decrease. Both provide me with liquidity. Impact investing for impact, or impact investing for returns. What would you do if you were me? To be financially prudent, I'm told to put my money in an account so I can always gain interest. But as a sovereign architect, I understand that money is energy and it must be used to make a difference. I must align and build with those who align with that decision. Because as an impact investor, I must have a deeper vision. Impact investing. My mind's constantly wrestling with return versus impact, often leading me guessing. But to the sovereign architect, I realize the capital I have is a blessing. Impact is what I must be addressing. I choose impact over return, and this is what it means to be fully human. Workshops and seminars on people claiming to invest capital in ways that provide impact. But impact is a word that's subjective. Does impact mean impact with financial returns, interest rates, and more? Does impact mean communities being raised up, families being changed forever? Community never gets that kind of capital, never gets that kind of measurement, as long as Wall Street is the impact as opposed to community needs and residents, lifting up souls and spirits to become free. The impact investing is just another way of guessing. The $500 million fully human fund, fully human leaders bring skin in the game of 9%. The 6-member tribe and the 3,000-member community. That is the unity, sacred geometry, and living up to a deserving soul brings the clarity. Impact investing. My mind's constantly wrestling with return versus impact, often leading me guessing. But to the sovereign architect, I realize the capital I have is a blessing. Impact is what I must be addressing. I choose impact over return, and this is what it means to be fully human. This is what it means to be fully human. Ancestors, ancestors. I am broadcasting at 500 hertz. Are you picking up?
Wow, that was amazing. That was so cool. Thank you so much. That was so beautiful.
Well, thank you for listening, and I appreciate your comments, and thank you for inspiring. That goes both ways.
That's so
Which
fun.
goes back to energy is everything. And that's where I truly believe that. And I went through my wreckage, and I now understand that my wreckage was necessary for me to be able to have that clarity on that knowing. And that leads to my next pillar. And this is one that I find Jess to be a person who exhibits this strong love energy. So she's been able to be that pillar that I've seen her go through significant storms in her life while still showing up and being present in meetings, still showing up and being present to serve, and not allowing those things to be excuses and reasons not to do it. And so what I shared with Jess one day was that because I'm a person who constantly looking at human emergence and studying human behaviors and how they work in society, I really began to look at, and then looking within my own community, my own being the Black skin community in that context, and realizing that the most important pillar of that community was the grandmother. That when the grandmother passes, it changes everything about how those families act from that point forward. We often call her Big Mom. Tyler Perry made a whole series and became a billionaire of characterizing the Big Mama, the grandmother. And with just being a grandmother, and then you talking about your grandmother and her impact of how working with a woman, and I believe she had a quote, I might misphrase, but I want you to talk about that because I know that's had an influence in you. And this is where I want to go with this within the Grateful Spirit pillar, is that I'm grateful for my pain, because of my pain, then I don't learn. I grow from those pain. I grow from that pain. And your grandmother, you reference in your book, you says that she made a statement about listening and comforting a woman. And she said, if I did nothing else in my life but save that woman, my life would be complete. And I really want to know, because I know your grandmother had a huge influence on you, but why would you pick that particular quote to put in your book as a symbol for someone like myself who doesn't know your relationship with your grandmother, but that's how I'm viewing you now through that powerful statement?
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you again for the beautiful song. I'm excited to listen to it again and to digest it fully. So coming back to my grandma, maybe to share the story that you're referencing. So my grandmother ran a fashion store in London, and she would often tell this story about, one day it was a very busy day at the store, and she was being pulled in all these different directions, and there was a woman that was in the store who was really clearly struggling. And so my grandmother kind of stopped everything that she was doing to create space for this woman to process all that was going on for her. And then a couple of weeks later, the woman came back and said exactly as you quoted. She said, that day I was thinking about taking my life, but that conversation with you convinced me to stay alive. And my grandmother would share this story, and she'd say, if there's nothing else that I've done in my life but created the space for this woman to process all that was going on for her, that is enough, and I am enough. And I really come back to that story a lot. My grandmother, who was inspiring to me in many ways, and she was an artist. I think just her creative spirit and approach to life inspired me in many ways. But I think this story in particular, but I think so often when we're talking about many of these themes that we're engaging around, it can feel like this very grandiose vision of what are we trying to do, and it can feel quite overwhelming. But this power of actually, so often it's how are we showing up to the people around us, and what is the ripple effect of that, and what can come about as a result of just an orientation to the beginning of our conversation around Ubuntu and I am because we are. If we can show up from that place, or there's another line in the Baha'i writings that says that your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. And thinking about what would it really look like if we were to show up and engage from that place, and what would be the kind of ripple impact of that.
Absolutely. And Jess, I want to bring you in now because, Jenna, to your point, to get me to the point where I have a grateful spirit and I'm grateful for my life. Actually, Jenna, I sent to you the gratitude song not long ago. that I created similar. And that came from a prayer that I say every single day as part of my morning ritual. I wake up in the morning, I go through my list of gratitude, sets my state of 10, then I listen to my gratitude song, I listen to my songs calling on my ancestors every single day. I want to piggyback on the ancestor part that I know how important it is to you as well. But I put myself on a 180-day journey to really live at the state of gratitude and really live there, recognize it as a state and get out of lack and getting out of selling and transactions, but just getting to trust and have faith in the universe, focus on purpose and serving, and knowing that if I lift up a deserving soul, that the universe will provide for me, and having that faith to do that. And Jess and I talked about it. Jess loved the idea. Jess agreed to join me on this 180-day journey. And everything we're building within the Fully Human movement is based on sacred geometry, 6s, 3s, and 9s. You'll see that as we continue to build. But Jess, I want you to kind of talk about what you taught me, because I thought I had it figured out until you shared with me. But King, what is your regenerative rhythm? What are you doing to deal with and center yourself? And when you exposed that to me and you shared that with me, it really helped center me and change my life. So I want you to talk a bit brief about your regenerative rhythm, because in Jenna, you'll see that when she shares that with you, there are several sections in your book where you talk about how folks talk about some of the same things Jess talk about in their culture and with how they run their companies as a way to keep their employees engaged. So.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where to start on this one. I guess, back in the store where Jenna's mother was with this woman who needed to process. She was obviously not in a harmonious state, and everyone around could feel that. There were probably behaviors and symptoms of what she was going through. And then Jenna's mom had the wherewithal to hold space for her. And that in itself is a co-regulation technique, and, learned very much from being the mother. Like, if mom's not happy, nobody's happy. But, by the opposite terms, like, if mom is happy, she can hold space for others to be happy as well. And one of the things that I was doing with the patients at Mountains of Hope was doing that process in itself, is just holding the space for someone to process what they're going through, especially when it's a crisis. And one of the things that I love about Jenna's book is talking about when we're in crisis, we need to do that together. And Jenna learned this from witnessing her mother doing that, and that nothing else is more important. Like, there's no transaction that is more important. Like, you need to check out with your milk and buy your milk more than you need to be with a human who's having a really challenging time and about to end their life. So that's it. That's the regulation rhythm, is like not moving so fast that we're not processing or digesting the strong emotions that we're feeling. And one of the things that I did with you, King, at Mountains of Hope, when you were so eager to just keep moving along and like, what's the next thing on the schedule? And I was like, well, the next thing is put your feet on the ground. We're going to co-regulate. And I think it's just a practice that's not taught inside of a culture that's like, go, 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 and get the next thing. Because it's in how we go about it. It's what Jenna's saying. It's like, how are you in your relations? How are you able to be with someone rather than just going to the end and using and being transactional with each other? And definitely this practice came from working at the end of life and understanding that there's going to be so much that has to be processed to come to this completion of actually transforming that identity and moving into another state. And noticing that for myself, as we look at like these journeys into the dark, that we don't have to come into a crisis that's going to take our life. We have these crises all day, every day, in different situations that just arise in this world. And we have an opportunity each time to just pause and resource ourselves before moving forward. So that's what it is the regulation, is making sure that I'm uplifted before I can I guess I need more deposits in my account before I can take withdrawals. And there's something about that we can create a regenerative energy system when I'm clear about that. And knowing if I'm not resourced and I actually don't know how to resource myself, there is a mother. There's a Mother Earth who created us, and she's happy to resource you anytime you want to put your feet.
Yeah, I think Jess may ran into.
Actually,
Okay.
oh, I was gone. We can just support each other in that regulation rather than breaking each other down. We can hold each other up.
And with that context, Jenna, the question I want to ask you now is, why was it important for you to put rituals and practices of breath work, of mindfulness, of taking a moment to just be at peace in your book?
Yeah, no, I love these reflections. And just to reflect on what Jess just shared, that there's a line that I can come back to that share in the book from Martin Luther King, where he said, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And I think this power of like, what are these steps that we're taking, and to this point of like being fully immersed in nature and what we can learn from being in nature. And I think it connects back to what you're asking around, whether it's breath work or yoga or even swimming or different ways that bring us back into our bodies and take us out of our heads, to kind of really being able to connect to both like what is the universe trying to teach us and how do we become channels. I have a kind of mantra written on my desk, and it says, I am a joyful, abundant channel of love. And like that's this kind of goal that said, and like in order to be that and to emanate that, what is that recharge that we're talking about, to be able to show up and engage from that space. And I think it looks differently for different people, but being able to tune into what are those tools and practices that can, help one to be able to be that channel.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. We're getting to the top of the hour. We get two more pillars to go through. I want to shift us now to the next pillar, which is governing principles. And governing principles is very important to me because, like I said, Jess had an internet issue. She'll get back in. But in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I read it as my Bible. In other words, I reference it daily. It's not a book I just read once and put away. And he talks about there's a difference between principles and values. He said values are like, anybody can have values, such as gangsters or criminals can say, our values that we're not going to sell drugs around schools. That can be agreed upon value. Or that we're not going to, within a mob, they didn't believe in, if you wasn't in their life, they wouldn't touch your external family, those kind of values. Where he said principles were long-lasting and life-changing, and they're universal, like gravity is a principle. And no matter how much you want to argue with it, you can drop the ball and it's going to go to the ground every single time. No matter how much you cry, how much you pray about it, that's a universal principle. And so I set that context because, to me, principles are, especially particularly governing principles, we choose them. In yoga, they talk about, let me let Jess back in. They talk about having these yamakas, these guiding things that govern who you are. Like, for example, my governing principles, I have 9, but I just share quickly 4. Integrity, love, faith, generative. Those are 4 of my governing principles of my 9 that I have to hold myself accountable to my actions. I literally do a weekly assessment of my actions, and but I estimate how true were I to my principles and how far I was from my principles. And then next week I work to be better, and that's my growth mindset as well. So I set that context because in your book you talk about, which I thought was interesting, that you talk about companies created what's called brave spaces, and these brave spaces. And just when I met her, she talked about a safe space. So I just kind of want to have you talk about what's a brave space, how do you see principles and values fitting within a company and organization, and as an impact investor, how important is that in your determination if you're going to invest in a company, understanding what their principles and values and their brave spaces?
I think a big part of the nature of brave spaces is creating the opportunity to have what can sometimes be challenging conversations. We have a concept in the Baha'i writings around the power of consultation, and think about companies. Like there's a company I talk about in the book called Innisfree Hotels, and they've created what they call a cultural manifesto or cultural manual. And in that manual, a lot of the principles are around creating the environments that enable people to be able to share from their particular vantage points and perspectives, and that there's the idea that what we'll be able to come up with as a whole is so much greater than what any one of us individually might be able to determine. So how do we create those environments where people feel like truly encouraged to be able to share fully from that particular vantage point, and that's going to be held by the group and engaged with, and that then it might be the final outcome is very different from what any one individual could have come up with, but that's part of the power of it.
Excellent. And I'm curious, before I go to the next pillar, do you see any parallels between what you wrote, what you've researched, and what you've seen, experienced out in the greater impact investing world from these great companies you research, and the movement that Jess and I are building?
Very much so. Yeah. And I think a lot, and even just seeing some of these pillars here is like so aligned. There's a framework that present in the book called the HEAL framework, stands for hope, empathy, abundance, and legacy. And I think so much of what you are sharing here deeply resonates with that. And certainly a lot of what we engage with the companies that we invest in, LightPost, is very much around many of these principles and embodying a growth mindset as they're hiring and retaining talent and exploring new areas of product and market development. So yeah, definitely really resonates.
Excellent. Do you have any comments, Jess, you wanted to share?
Yeah, I do. Just, my own personal experience as I've come into this movement and kind of like shifting who I am as an identity, I'm also seeing that I'm shifting my investment likewise. And so just confirming what Jenna is saying is that as I stand more in community and receive those reflections, see potential and possibility for humanity, rather than the way that I was about it before with my future investment, that was really a linear plan that I think was originated from the industrial age, where it was like a drain on the system. So by shifting my identity, shifting my beliefs, and shifting reflections around me, I'm now seeing the ability to serve humanity in a regenerative way. Much like I was saying about my energy and regulating that, I'm seeing with business, with economy, and with my investments, that all functions in that way, cycling and repurposing, so the impact, not just on one individual, a whole.
And absolutely. And Jess, you've been a trailblazer in leading with faith. So Jenna, I want to share with you as we go into this next pillar, the self-awareness pillar. And I've complimented Jess throughout each of these pillars, because I told her that that's one of the reasons what I wanted to build with her, is because she exemplifies these pillars. Whether she was calling herself fully human or not, and then she joined me on this journey to become more fully human. Self-awareness is so important. And she talked about how she invests her money now. I just want to give you a context, Jenna, and I want to ask you a question and your thoughts about this. That what Jess and I are doing, my background, again, system engineering, and I build what I call tribal resonance systems. And these are ways to build systems around how do you identify people that you want to connect with that's based on alignment, not just based on what's in common. Because alignment builds deeper relationships. I use LinkedIn primarily to build these connections, these relationships. And I use tools to connect me with LinkedIn for searching, and a podcast on my way. And you experience that, Jenna, inviting people into my world learning about them and seeing, are they really who they say they are, as a LinkedIn profile and their websites may say, or are they just using that just to get connections? And in doing so, I'm able now to use systems and AI tools now to build a community around a business that has a higher purpose and build a tribe around a business. And so we do that through what we utilize by lifting up another, getting a commonality. So let me explain to you what I mean. If I want to connect with you on LinkedIn and I don't know you, I just read your profile and I want to send a direct message to say, hello, how you doing, etc. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reference something from your profile to show you that I took interest and read it. Then I'm going to sing the gratitude song that I sent you. And I'm just going to say, I went through my wreckage. Here's a gratitude song. I hope this lands with you as much as it lands with me, and leave it at that. Now, you reply back like, great song, I love it. Then I'm going to say, great, I live with the state of gratitude. Help me support a deserving soul. And if you do that, now you've met me at the frequency of gratitude. I know what your state is. And now we both are gifting to a deserving soul $33. And we created a campaign. I'm not getting too much into the details of that because of the time, but we use that as a way to lift up someone else. And Rachel was someone who had cancer that we supported doing that. And as we built that out, I was telling Jess that in order to make these campaigns truly successful and work, it's going to require at least 9% of what the targeted raise is. So if we're trying to raise $99,000, it's going to require at least $9,000 in order to make it happen, to build the systems, to get the social media accounts configured, to build all the processing and matching and so on and so forth. And she stepped up and says, well, I'll be willing to do that. I'm willing to go ahead and put that fund. And as we build with Deserving Souls, they agree that we're going to build a mission around their business, a community around it, a campaign, and a strategy. So in 6 months, they're going to have 6 people that we built that's truly aligned with their mission, a tribe of, we call that a tribe, and then a community of 3,000 people who've gifted $33. And it becomes a very effective way of vetting people into the world. I wanted to give you that long context because you have the experience in impact investing. You've ran 2 companies. You have a vetting process of how you go about choosing companies to invest in. And so my question for you is twofold. Number one, does a model that we just described, and I know that's difficult to assess all that just off a question, but are we on the right path? Because we want to create a fully human fund for conscious entrepreneurs to kind of follow that process. That they bring $9,000 to a mission, we can help them raise $100,000 in 6 months. And we can build a tribe around them of 6 people who are aligned with that action, and then as well as a community around. So they sit down to you as an impact investor, they're bringing in $100,000, 6 aligned members of their team, and a community that supports the ideal and their model. Would that be enough for an impact investor to say maybe invest $1 million into that business based off that, not using the traditional financial metrics of credit scoring and things of that nature? So that's the first part of my question. I'll pause and answer anything for clarity.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, and probably would need to dive a bit more into understanding all the mechanics of it. But I think if I'm understanding correctly, this principle around how do we create opportunities for people to come together in community and finance initiatives, in rather than it being any one person is doing this by themselves. I think there's so much in that of what is that community building aspect, and the lowering the barriers to entry for people to engage in this work. And there's an organization called C-Note that think about where they've created a platform for people to contribute anything from sort of $10 upwards, and then they pool those funds together and then invest that onwards as a pooled vehicle. And so I think all of these structures that enable more of that opportunity for it to be more catalytic in terms of how capital is aggregated and then distributed, I think makes a lot of sense.
Excellent. Then my last question I want to ask, and then Jess has one that we can get ready to wrap up, is that I also noticed you did this consistently in your book, because as a system engineer, as a writer myself, I'm always looking for structure and systems. And I noticed that was constant in your book, is that you would end each chapter with a series of reflection questions. I talk about reflecting at the end of my week. So I just wanted to ask, why was that important to do that? And what inspires you to do that? And how did it feel as you finish your book? Did you have a reflection on now my book?
I really appreciate you pointing that out. And it definitely was a really important aspect for me from a design perspective in terms of having these reflection questions at the end of each chapter. And I think so much of it is that really the design around the book was just as much as a series of questions and stories as anything else, right? I mean, these are really complex topics that we could spend lifetimes trying to engage around. And that I think so much of it is, what does it look like to engage from a place of inquiry and to do that both individually and collectively? And what can happen when we create the spaces for holding those questions? And that's definitely been a key part of my journey, and definitely very much encouraged. I mentioned it earlier around the core principle in the Baha'i faith around independent investigation of truth, but so much through personal and professional life is the power of asking those questions. And so it's been great hearing that people have been using those questions as tools within their organizations, for prompts within their team retreats and gatherings, to be able to really provide an opportunity to be in inquiry together.
Excellent, excellent. Now, as we go ahead and wrap up our show and our podcast, again, we want to thank you for being such a wonderful guest on our show. Again, being authentic, for writing this book, for being you and living the life you live. Again, you ended the book signing event at Busboys and Poets, where I saw you talking about how important your ancestors were and living up to them. And as you can see, I have my ancestors behind my head. That plays a very important role in my life and how I live my life. And being fully human allows me to pick from all the ancestors instead of just ones that have my same skin suit. So now my question, with that being said, is I want to give you the opportunity to share any closing thoughts you might want to share with our listening audience, contact information where they can buy your book, or anything else that you want to share as we wrap up today's conversation.
Wonderful. No, thank you for that opportunity. And I definitely think coming back to these questions, there's a frame that I often come back to, is what is the trace that we're seeking to leave, and how do we kind of come back to the actions that we're taking on a daily basis really aligned with that trace that we're seeking to leave. So definitely would encourage people to check out the book. It's on my website. It's at jenna-nicholas.com/book. We also have a Substack, and just love to continue the conversation and be in community, and just appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you as well. Any closing thoughts, Jess, you want to share? You still with us, Jess? I see you have a little buffering happening. Well, maybe her internet is kind of spotty. Well, Jenna, I won't keep you anymore, or our listening audience. I want to thank everyone for listening to the Fully Human Trinity. This has been another episode where we wanted to bring you a person who we believe is fully human, exhibiting these behaviors, their wreckage to wisdom story, and how they're living their legacy now, as opposed to just leaving a legacy. So again, thank you for listening. And Jenna, did you share all the space so they can get your book?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And it's also available on Amazon and Bookshop and Barnes & Noble. It's called Enlightened Bottom Line. And thank you so much.
It's a great read. So thank you all for listening. And until next Wednesday, that's all for Look for Ways to Become More Fully Human. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care.
Race is a lie, a ghost in the machine, a veil over the eye. Race is a lie, a script for the managed, a reason to die. It's the dementia, the spirit, it's the glitch in the code. It's the heavy, heavy baggage on a sovereign road. Dissolve the construct. Yeah. Yeah, it started as a lie, a whisper in the dark, designed to keep the brothers from finding the spark. Father is a soul whose sovereign operating system was no longer whole. He didn't pull that trigger from his fully human place. The construct had the wheel, the construct ran the race.